For more than a decade, the Gosselin family was one of the most recognizable names in American television. Their faces were on magazine covers. Their living room was, in a very real sense, the living room of millions of strangers across the country. Jon and Kate Plus 8 was not just a reality show. It was a cultural phenomenon, a weekly ritual for families who believed they were watching something genuine, something warm, something true. But the children at the center of that story were not actors playing characters. They were real kids, growing up in real time, under lights that never really turned off. And now, one of those children has grown into a young woman with something important to say. Hannah Gosselin was born on May 10, 2004, one of 6 children delivered to Jon and Kate Gosselin in a single pregnancy that would eventually make them household names. From practically the moment she could walk, Hannah's life belonged, at least in part, to an audience. TLC premiered Jon and Kate Plus 8 in 2007, and the show quickly attracted millions of viewers drawn to the spectacle and supposed sweetness of raising 8 young children under one roof. Hannah was 3 years old when filming began. She did not choose this life. No one asked her if she wanted it. What viewers saw every week was a carefully edited version of the Gosselin household. They saw birthday cakes and family road trips and sibling squabbles that resolved themselves in 30 minutes. What they did not see, or at least what most chose not to examine too closely, was the cost of living that way. A home turned into a production set. Childhoods unfolding under the scrutiny of cameras mounted in almost every room. A mother, overwhelmed and controlling, who treated orderliness not as a preference, but as a religion. And a family, slowly fracturing under the pressure of its own public image. Kate Gosselin was, for years, framed by the media as a heroic figure, a woman managing an impossible situation with iron discipline and relentless energy. Her parenting style was strict to a degree that made some viewers uncomfortable, though many dismissed those concerns as uncharitable. She color-coded the children's clothing. She timed their meals to the minute. She expected, by all accounts, a level of obedience that left little room for the normal mess and uncertainty of childhood. For Hannah, who was a naturally sensitive and emotionally expressive child, this environment was suffocating. She would later describe those years not as a childhood, but as a performance. Every smile had a camera waiting for it. Every emotion was weighed against its potential damage to the family's brand. The cracks in the Gosselin marriage became impossible to ignore by 2009. Jon and Kate's divorce was not a private tragedy. It was, by that point, tabloid content, dissected on talk shows, and splashed across supermarket checkout lanes. The show rebranded as Kate Plus 8, and Kate retained primary custody of all 8 children. Jon was cast by much of the media as the irresponsible one, the man who had abandoned his family for a younger lifestyle. The truth, as Hannah would eventually help to reveal, was considerably more complicated. As Hannah grew older, something shifted inside her. The carefully maintained silence that had protected the family's public image began to feel less like loyalty and more like a cage. She watched her brother Colin disappear from the fabric of daily family life. Moved first to a behavioral institution when he was only 12 years old, then largely absent from the show's coverage, edited out of celebrations and family moments as though he had never existed. Hannah did not fully understand what was happening to her brother at the time, but she felt the absence of him like a wound that was never allowed to heal. In 2018, at 14 years old, Hannah made the decision that would define the next chapter of her life. She chose to leave her mother's home and move in with her father. This was not a simple or painless choice. Jon had been largely shut out of his children's lives in the years following the divorce. He had limited contact and had been depicted, often unfairly, as a destabilizing presence. But Hannah had spent enough time with him to see something different. She saw a man who offered her something her mother's home had not been able to provide: space, quiet, the permission to simply exist without being observed or managed. Jon fought for custody, and in 2018, a court granted it to him. Shortly afterward, Colin was released from a facility where he had been living and came to live with Jon and Hannah as well. For the first time, 2 of the 8 Gosselin children were living outside Kate's direct control. Hannah later described this period as the beginning of her real life. Not a performance, not a brand, just a life. The truth that Hannah had been carrying came more fully into public view in 2023 when she participated in a segment of Vice TV's documentary series examining the darker realities behind beloved reality television programs from the 2000s. Her words were measured and quiet. She did not perform outrage or lean into the drama that the format might have encouraged. She simply told the truth as she had lived it. She described how her brother Colin had been separated from the rest of the family even before he was sent away to an institution, how he ate at different times, how he was kept away from his siblings, how, even within the walls of their shared home, he had been isolated in a way that none of the children fully understood, but all of them could feel. Colin himself spoke with even more specificity about what he had experienced. He described a room built with a bolt lock on the outside. He described being confined, restrained, and left in darkness. He described a childhood spent being treated not as a child who needed understanding, but as a problem that needed to be contained. Kate Gosselin responded publicly by stating that Colin had been diagnosed with serious behavioral conditions and that every action she took was done under the guidance of medical professionals. She suggested that his memory of events was distorted by illness. Her eldest daughter, Maddie, supported her publicly and disputed Colin's account. Hannah did not enter that public battle loudly. She has never been the kind of person who reaches for a microphone when pain is present. But she had already told the truth in the only way that mattered, with her feet, when she walked out of her mother's house at 14, and with her voice, when she finally gave her account of what life in that house had actually been like. What Hannah's testimony added to the record was not simply corroboration of Colin's claims. It was something more human than that. It was the account of a sibling who had watched her brother disappear and had carried the confusion and grief of that disappearance for years without being able to name it or speak it aloud. By 2024, Hannah had begun the tentative work of reestablishing some kind of relationship with her mother. She spoke in interviews about occasional conversations with Kate, describing them as careful and limited but present. She said simply, in one exchange, that Kate was her mother, and that reality did not go away regardless of everything that had happened. There was no triumphant reconciliation in these words. There was something harder and more honest than that. The acknowledgement that love and harm are not always opposites, and that the people who shaped us most painfully are often the same ones we cannot entirely let go of. Hannah graduated from high school in 2023. She started a skincare line. She appeared publicly alongside her father, both of them looking healthy and settled in a way that neither had always managed to project. She began a relationship. She built a life that belonged to her, shaped by her own choices rather than by a production schedule or a mother's need for control. She is, as of this writing, 20 years old. She has already lived through more than most people encounter in a lifetime twice as long. What Hannah Gosselin's story asks of us is not simple. It is not a clean narrative of a villain and a victim, even though real harm was done and real children carried the weight of it. It is the story of a family that was asked to perform happiness for an audience while struggling privately with dysfunction that no edit could fully conceal. It is a story about the price that children pay when they are treated as content rather than as people. And it is, ultimately, a story about a young woman who decided that the truth was worth more than the silence that had kept her mother's image intact. The show ended. The cameras moved on to other families, other spectacles. But the Gosselin children did not get to move on so easily. They grew up inside a story that had been written for them by adults who had their own interests in how it would be told. Hannah chose, eventually, to tell her own version, not for ratings, not for revenge, simply because the truth was there, and it deserved to be spoken. Whether the full Gosselin family ever finds its way to genuine healing is something no one outside of it can answer. What we do know is that Hannah is no longer waiting for permission to tell her story. She has already told it, and those who were paying attention have heard every word.